I'm just glad that there are so many of us who want to know about family therapy and how it works. It just gives us so much of encouragement to see this. And I would also like to set up the pace for the next four sessions. Now we are looking at a four days, but we have paced it out across different weeks. So what we learn can be kind of consolidated within the week, and if you're able to kind of practice, I understand some of you are practitioners and some of your students as well. So, which is we have a mixed group, and therefore we have kept our today's presentation like at a basic level, and depending upon today's response, we will see whether we have to increase the level in terms of understanding, or if we should have more basic concepts like that. But today we are going to see about basics of family therapy. What is family therapy, and what are the basic concepts that we have to know? What are the principles, and some of the techniques, which is what we'll see today. Right. I have also kept my chat open. So in case if you're having, like, after every concept, what we were thinking of was we will have a brief discussion, because if we unmute all of us, then it's going to be a little difficult in terms of understanding. So we're going to keep our chat open at that point of time, so we can discuss and then we can go to the next subject. Now, the entire title of a workshop for today is Basic Techniques in Family Therapy. Now, what is family therapy? What do we do? Now, it looks like a very vague term, family counseling, family therapy, but it is a structured psychotherapy. Now, if you're practitioners and if you're students, you all would have heard the term so many times: psychotherapy, psychoanalytics, psychodynamics. You'd have heard the word. Now, family therapy is a very valid, acceptable, structured psychotherapy. Now, we have certain pattern and certain level of assessment, way of assessing things, and different formats of intervention as well. Now, the main aim in family therapy, the first of all, is to identify faulty patterns that families have got themselves into. Initially, if we look at it, when families come at the first point of contact, what do they tell? They come with a problem. They bring one person and they say this person is the problem. It can be a child, it can be the person with the diagnosis, or it can be anyone. But they come with a very linear understanding and say that this person is the cause of all the problems in the family, and we don't know how to deal with it. Now, as a family therapist, what we have to understand is this: that it may be right, it may be wrong, but that first point of contact, that first information, gives us a clue of what is probably happening within that system. And that we have to note down and make a note of it, identify what the family is trying to tell because of that behavior or symptom that they are looking at as a problem. So what when as we start talking in further sessions, then we will get to see how this pattern is unfolding right in front of our eyes. So the first aim of family therapy in that way is we are looking at identifying faulty patterns with families. Now, why are we doing it? Now, when we identify these patterns and we kind of work with the person who is being pointed out as the problem person or as the behavior, now we are helping that person to be relieved of the stress. And to an extent, families also look at us as someone who's an expert and who can just talk to everybody and sort things out. So the very fact that they are willing to be there in front of us to talk about it, to discuss this itself is very relieving. It reduces their stress level to a large extent. And what we are also doing is we are trying to enhance better interaction between different members of the family. Now, these are primary aims that we do. Now, we are also looking at helping families understand that it's not a factor A cost factor B linear effect. There is a circular way of how we have to look at our problems. There is something that is maintaining why this problem is happening in the first place. So we have to get the family to understand the concept of the circle that they are revolving around in, and they are unable to break that cycle. We have to help them understand that. And focus will be more in terms of maintaining a particular problem behavior. Now, there is a reason why a problem behavior exists in all families. Now, why is it there? What is that problem fulfilling at the end of the day for the family? So that is something that we have to understand. And the most important thing is we are looking at a family as a context. They are not individuals. It's a context. So we are thinking the understanding or assumption, primary assumption is this, that we have people together, or when we have an individual with a problem, resolution of the problem is much effective when we have significant others with them. When we talk to them alone, we can tell, okay, you do this, you do this, you do that. But when there is a circularity, when the entire understanding is because of someone else's behavior, it is being influenced by someone else's thought, then we need to have those significant others to help in effective resolution of the problem. All right. Now, there are some basic concepts about family therapy that we have to understand. The most primary thing about family therapy is systems theory. All right. Now, there is a general systems theory from which we have taken up concepts that will help us understand families in a better light. Now, I'll just move on to the picture. Just take a look at this picture. Now, you have those two medium-sized blue circles. They are called as a system. Now, this system is what we call as the families. So, parents and siblings. We are not talking about extended families. We are talking about parents and siblings within that particular family. Now, though they will be called as the system. Now, throughout this next 4 weeks or 3 weeks, please keep in mind when we're talking about a system, we are talking about the immediate family. And even when you're working with family, this is something that you have to keep in mind. They constitute one whole group. Now, if you look at the outer bigger circle, it's called as the suprasystem. Everything else, our workplace, extended family, friends, other relationships, all of them will come under the suprasystem, right? Now, within the system, we have smaller circles called as subsystems. Yes. Now, what are these subsystems? What does it constitute of? Now, the first subsystem will be about the parents, because that's how you start the life cycle stages. Parents get married. So the first subsystem will be the parental subsystem. And then you have the sibling subsystem. All right. Now, between these two subsystems, we also have to understand that each member of these families also function as individuals. So that also has to be kept in mind. But we are primarily, when we are talking about subsystem, we are talking about the parental subsystem and the sibling subsystem. Now, with this background of understanding in our mind, now let's see what is systems theory. Now, how do we have to understand a family in that sense? Now, what are we looking at? We are trying to see that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Now, if you're going back to the picture, the whole, that is the system, is bigger compared to the subsystems all put together. That's the understanding. So, for example, if I have to give up something, why will I give it up? I like something. As for example, uh, I want to work as a mother. I still want to work, but there are some restrictions in me going to work because I also have to think about what responsibilities I have towards my family. That is the whole. So my part is lesser in that sense, and I would give up on some things that even though I want it, I will be willing to give up on some things because the whole is more important. Now, when I do something that brings an imbalance in the system, then we can see significant dysfunction starting to happen, right? Therefore, the most important understanding of systems is this: the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Now, second thing, when we look at it, there are prescribed rules that govern the system. Now, we all know, we all have come from we all have been in family units, family systems. Now, we know there is a rule, nobody will talk about the rule. For example, there will be some rules which will be explicitly told that if you go out as a teenager, you have to come back by 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening. That's an explicit rule. But there are implicit rules that at 7 o'clock it's understood that everybody in the family is going to come together for dinner. Now, if one person violates that rule, then you can see conflicts starting up. Then there will be questions: where did you go? Why couldn't you come? What happened? Why aren't you talking to us? So, just one small rule: one night the adolescent is not there in the family dinner at 7 o'clock can create significant difficulties, conflicts within the system. So there are prescribed rules that govern the system, and as a therapist we have to understand what are those rules. We have to know the implicit rules as well as the explicit rules. Now there are boundaries that are there between the system, between systems, and between within subsystems also, right? Now if you go through this picture again, you have two systems. Now there are boundaries. Let's imagine those black lines are the boundaries. Now there are boundaries there. Now there are boundaries that can be completely closed, as in I will not allow anybody from outside to enter my system. I am very uncomfortable in doing it because I don't want, it can be for various reasons. I don't want my family secrets to go out. I'm afraid of what the other person will say. Or primarily, I'm uncomfortable about letting another person come in. And I have set up a rule and I don't want anybody to jeopardize that. So there are closed boundaries. Sometimes, now what I'm giving example is as negative, but sometimes these closed boundaries can also be positive. Now, there are also open boundaries where anything and everything is permissible. It's okay. I'm coming at 10 o'clock in the night. It's okay. No problem. You take your time. And there are semi permeable boundaries where there are some things that can go in, some things that can come out. At, at the other end of it, we can also understand that there are some things that will only come in, it cannot go out. So there are semi-permeable boundaries. Now these, it's very important for us to understand what kind of boundaries the system has. We have four people sitting in front of us as a therapist. I need to understand whether the sibling subsystem and the parental subsystem are enmeshed. They're completely like this. Children will do only what the parents will tell, and parents will sometimes take an upper hand, or sometimes the children can take an upper hand in that system, but it's a completely enmeshed. Nobody knows their individual responsibilities. Now what is the problem of having a boundary like that or being enmeshed in a relationship like that? Can anybody send in a chat? Can you type it? What is the problem of having a boundary like that? Confusion. Good. Then what else happens? Let's have a little more interaction. I don't want to keep talking and talking and talking. What else happens? What is the problem of having a boundary line? Power dynamics change. Brilliant. One parent may feel unheard, non clarity, codependency, always dependent, restriction, lack of individuality, indiscipline, curtails the individual growth, rebellion from the child's side. Brilliant. Personality development issues, lack of communication, misunderstandings. Amazing. I think I have to step up my notch in terms of teaching. Okay, suspicion, robotic in functions, dull routine. Awesome. Okay, I am going to go back to screen sharing, so I may not be able to see your chat after this. But that's a brilliant set of answer that all of you have given me. It's amazing. Now, this is why we say that boundaries have to be semi-permeable, and it depends upon situations, depends upon circumstances. There might be places where it has to be open, there might be places where it has to be closed, and there might be places where it has to be semi permeable. And this again will depend upon which life cycle stage that the family is in. So we have to understand. Now you have a toddler or a newborn in the house, you can't expect the boundary to be closed and expect the child to take care of themselves. So it depends upon situations and circumstances. Now, next, what we have to look at in terms of systems theory is there are predictable patterns of interaction within and among symptoms or the systems. So there are predictable patterns of interaction. Like for example, if the child will know that if I do this, I know my mother is going to shout at me, and if my mother shouts, I know my father is going to come out. And if my father comes out, I know I will get the attention that I need. It can be negative or positive. I don't care. I want attention at this point of time. So I will do that. Okay, so there are some predictable patterns that the systems will keep going through in a loop. They will be going round and round and that, and we have to be able to identify that. Now these systems have, like we said, they have subsystems, and they are themselves part of suprasystems. Now suprasystems also is equally, understanding suprasystems is also equally important, because a lot of influence on the system can happen from the suprasystem, especially for example in our Indian context. In that sense, uh, joint, sometimes it's extended families, sometimes it's joint families. So what kind of influence does that have on me and my family, on my system? That again plays a very important role. Again, personality issues, most often anxiety issues, and where adolescents and children don't feel that they don't have the space to do what they want to do, all of it arise from the fact that the system is unable to regulate itself without the influence or interference of the suprasystem. So that is something that we have to understand and be able to identify. Now, there are these events and behaviors, it's better understood as having a circular causality. Instead of having a linear understanding that this causes this, we need to understand where the whole roundup is coming from. It can be an event, it can be a behavior, it can be a person, it can be a symptom. But whatever is we are able to identify, or whatever is being put across to us as the problem, has a circular causality. And what is that circular causality is something that we have to be able to identify. Now, when we talk about family systems, there is a steady growth and evolution of the system. Now, we saw there is different life cycle stages, right? Now, obviously, as the children grow, as the family grows, there is a evolution in terms of how the system is going to adapt itself, accommodate themselves, make the required changes that they have to make. Now, when they are unable to do it, then there is a problem. So, in as far as systems theory is concerned, these are main concepts that we have to understand. Any family, if you take, they are a system, and they exist within a supra system. Within the system, we have subsystems. The primary understanding is this, that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And there are prescribed rules that there is there in all families. It can be either implicit or explicit. There are boundaries, it can be open, closed, or semi permeable. It has to be, the family, the system has to be flexible enough to know when it has to be open, closed, or semi permeable. There are patterns that are very predictive within systems and between systems also. Now, the events or behavior always have a circular causality, and we will have to be able to understand that. And there is a great steady growth and evolution in terms of the system itself. All right. So this is in terms of our primary understanding of what the systems theory is about. And there's a very basic thing in family therapy which we all have to know. Now, when we're working with families, this is the most important thing. The system has to be viewed as a whole. Families, what will happen is they individuals will come and try and talk to the therapist out of the session. They will say, no, I can't tell this in front of the others, this is very important, you have to know about it. I would suggest that we should discourage that and encourage them to rather share it in the session, because families are always viewed as a whole. When we start giving importance to one person or we start demarcating like that, then we inside the therapist, the problem that can happen there is inside our head as a therapist, we can start taking sides. And that's not very good for the family. We are not allowing the family to progress. So when we're working with a family, they have to be viewed as a whole. Only then we will be able to understand the circularity of it. Now, are we clear with the systems theory? Okay, so can we, all right, now let's move on to the next part of our presentation today. Now, there are three basic principles in family therapy that we have to understand. Okay. Now, the first thing is hypothesizing. Now, what does this mean? What is hypothesizing? Generally, what do you think is hypothesizing? Can you send in a chat? What is hypothesizing? What is your understanding of hypothesis? Making assumptions. Very good. So, when it comes to families, what kind of assumptions do we have to make? Okay, it can be exaggerated also. Good. So, in the family context, what kind of assumptions do we have to make? Getting an equation that explains the problem. Okay, fine. Predictions. Predictions about what? Roles. Okay, good. Making correlations. Good. Interpersonal relationship. Fair enough. Causes, culture, expectations, how the family is supposed to be, way of communicating, predictions about the value systems, responsibilities, habit formation. Awesome. Based on observed roles, authority and responsibilities, problem solving skills, function of the family, illusion of mastery, predictability and control, perfection, hierarchy, process. Awesome. Brilliant. Okay. Predicted age related behaviors. Okay. Discipline. Good. That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all for being so interactive. This is making it really interesting for me also to explain this process. Now, when it comes to family therapy, what most of what you said is right. And what we're trying to hypothesize rather, we are formulating a hypothesis about from the existing information that we have about the family. Basically, meaning the first point of contact. We are not going to sit and have a detailed session at the first point of contact, correct? Now they will call you, or they will come and meet you, or they would have sent word through someone, which is how most of us get our referrals. At that point of time, what is the information that the family is giving to you? My child is not studying. It's a very common problem that parents always bring their children with. My child is not studying, he or she is not listening. There is nothing that we are not able to control them. They don't obey, they don't listen. This is the most often the problem that we all hear. Now, based on this information, what kind of a hypothesis can we form about the family system based on the first point of contact? Now, the first thing that I can assume is uh, maybe the child is trying to tell the parents that he or she wants a space. Now, that will again depend upon the age of the child. So, let's say, for example, child is between 13 and 15. So, child is telling, I am moving into a different phase and I want my own boundary, I want my space. And this is how the child is expressing that. Now, this is my first hypothesis about the family. My second hypothesis could be that either parent is over disciplinarian, is overly strict with the child. He or she is not spending enough time with the child to understand what the child is trying to tell. This can be my second hypothesis. Now, when the family comes for the first session, I have to use this information to channelize the topic in getting to see if the hypothesis is correct or not. Now, the first session, we will get to know whether the hypothesis is right or wrong. We will know. For example, they come and then you realize that the child has a diagnosis. Child is probably having a, say for example, a mild intellectual disability or say specific learning disability. So it is not about the parents just being strict, it's also about the fact that the child is anxious or worried about her or his own inability or competency when in compared to others. So here my hypothesis is proved wrong. Correct. Now next I have to frame my next hypothesis. Now what? Now, this is the situation. I know my hypothesis is not correct or it's partially right. So, what next? Now, when I talk to the family, I have to try and understand what is happening. Okay, child has specific learning disability. What are the parents doing? Are they able to help out? Are they able to understand that this child has this problem? Do the parents know what problem this is, how long it can go, what is the course, and through that time, how is the child coping with those difficulties? Does the child have more difficulties at home? Does he have more difficulties in the school? Have they put him in a regular school? Now these informations will help me understand the causal factor of why the child is being a rebel at that point of time. All right. So then I correct my hypothesis. Now this is just an example. So I sometimes my hypothesis may be right. I think I hypothesize that this is a problem, and I know when the family comes, I was right in understanding what I had done. Now, why is this important to hypothesize at the first point itself? Because then we can push the interview or the session, the questions that we are asking, to a more structured format, because sometimes when you sit and talk to families you will get every and other information. Sometimes it may not be even important. Yes, we have to give them time for ventilating and telling about what they are going through at that point of time, which will also give us more information. But that same ventilation can also be channeled in a structured format, which will also help make the family think and not just feel. Most often when we start putting our emotions into our behavior and the event, then we stop thinking. The rationality is completely lost. We only start feeling bad and angry, and emotions is what we start looking at. Now when we structure the interview in a channelized way, when we have a hypothesis in our hand, then we can train the family to start thinking and stop reacting. Then when they start thinking the process, we put the, it's a chain process, then we understand the causality of the problem. All right. So this is why hypothesizing at the first point itself is very, very important. Now when you're also hypothesizing, what else do? It helps us in adding or eliminating variables that can contribute or maintain a problem behavior. All right. So I'm having a hypothesis and I said it can be proved or disproved. So I know what other variable I have to look out for, or do I have to add to what I already have? It makes my work a lot more easier. It also helps categorize events or experiences expressed by individual members within the family unit. So now, for some time, example, you talk to a family about one particular event, they will, from there, they will jump to something that happened 5 years back. They will say, ma'am, this happened that time also, ma'am. From that time, they are doing only this. Always they are doing this, which is not going to help us. And not, it's not going to help the family either. You start pulling in things from 5 years back, we are not going to like for example, it can be a necessary information which will help us form a hypothesis, or it can be something that will not help us in helping the family. So either ways, it is going to help us in categorizing that experience as helpful or not helpful, number one. Number two, does it come under behavior? Does it come under emotions? Does it come under experience? Does it come under different life cycle stages? I am categorizing that behavior, problem behavior, into a concept. So it helps me understand the family better. And when I understand the family better, it's easier for me to help them resolve their problem. Hypothesis of the therapist, it also helps the family build their script without interference from the family entropy. What is entropy? What is entropy? Can you type in? Decline or weakness in the system, disorderness. Very good. Anybody else? Okay, gives information about orderness of a system. All right, good. Anyone else would like to? Okay, it's a scientific concept as well as a measurable physical property that is most commonly associated with a state of disorder, randomness, or uncertainty. All right, someone has really done their work before coming here. There is no proper symptom. All right, thank you so much. Lack of order. Correct. So, primarily, families are disorderly or disorganized when they reach us. They are completely disorganized. So, when they build their script, which is why I said we can nudge them in the session to channelize their interview and bring a structure to it. So, as they write their family story, we can help them minus all the or the disorganized categories that is not helping them in any way. In turn, it is also moving the family towards negentropy, which is we are moving them towards a system, towards an orderliness, towards organization. All right. So hypothesis is something that will help us do all of these things. And hypothesis must be systemic. Like I said, systems is the basic understanding we need to have. We have to view the family as a whole. We cannot look at them as individuals. So when I'm hypothesizing a problem that is there in front of me as a family, I have to do it for the entire family. I cannot say again, like the family, I cannot bring it to a linear account and telling that this person's problem behavior is what is maintaining that. I cannot do that. So when I'm hypothesizing, I need to be systemic in my hypothesis. I need to be able to include all members of the family in that. All right. So I hope hypothesis is clear. All right. The next principle that we are looking at is the more another important principle that we need to know in terms of systems, circularity. Now we said there is a circular causality to everything that is happening in the family, correct? Now we have to understand that the focus is on reciprocal relationship between events. Now, okay, let's take this example. A guy is kicking a stone. Very simple. He's kicking a stone. Now, a guy is kicking a dog. What happens? The dog can react in any number of ways to it. And in response to the dog's reaction, the guy can also react back in any number of ways. Correct? So either dog can turn around, bite him, chase him, or it can get afraid of the person and run away. Now, in reaction to that, this person will respond back, no? Either if the dog is like trying to chase them back, he is going to run, or if the dog is getting scared, he's going to chase the dog even more. So this reciprocity in events and behavior is what we are calling as circularity of things that happen within the system. So it doesn't matter where it started. The problem is now they are caught in that circle and they're unable to break the cycle, because after all those years of problem, they don't even know where it started and who started it. And that does not matter after a point. What the point is, we need to understand because of what happens, because of what, and then you come back to square one. Then how do you break that? All right, this is circularity that we are talking about. Now, therapist gathers information based on the feedback of the family, but within the context of the problem. I am not, as a therapist, I'm not deviating and I'm not telling that, okay, you tell me what happened 10 years back. No, the family has already given you a context, correct? Family has already given us a context. So within that context, I want to see how circular things are within that system. Now, this information that I have gathered, it explains the difference, and that difference that is explained is the relationship that we are looking at. Might look a little difficult, but just look at it this way. The process of circularity, it involves blaming and counter blaming. I didn't do anything, he did it. I didn't do anything, she did it. It's counter blaming. Now, what happens after a point is the conflict material, the content or the problem becomes unresolvable. And then entire family starts thinking that, okay, this situation cannot be reconciled at all. I cannot do anything about it. I am fed up because I am going in circles and it's not helping anybody. Now, in the process of circularity, what we also have to understand is this. Now, trying to work out through the conflict, because of this causality, circularity, they also end up hurting each other in a bad way. Correct? They start blaming others and they don't want to take the responsibility of what could be probably maintaining the problem. They don't want to take responsibility because it hurts. And it's not the mistake. It's not a mistake, but it happens unconsciously and it hurts. When I know that I am a cause of something, obviously it's going to pain me a lot and I don't want to take it up. And sometimes change is very, very difficult, especially in a system. Correct? So, this difference is what I have to understand in terms of circularity. Now, when I understand the difference, I will understand the relationship of what is happening between who and how. All right. So, this is something that we have to understand. Now, most often, what also happens in circularity is the individual systems, like say the father, mother, and the children, there is a blind spot to their own way of how they contribute to the system. They will not be able to look at how they are maintaining it. They can only see what the others are doing. So they are stuck in a blind spot. So it's not something that they have consciously got into, but it is something that the system has started maintaining by itself. That circularity also we have to understand. All right. So this triadic modality of people going in circles, it helps understand circularity within the system. Triangulation, we will look at it a little later. All right. Now, functions of circularity, it varies across different circumstances. Now, understanding circularity and how it can help the therapist depends upon the problem that is placed in front of you and the kind of system that you're going to work with. So it is not the same in all situations. There will be differences, and we should be able to identify those differences. All right. So I hope circularity is clear, and I know I am rushing through. Please do forgive me for the lack of time. The next important principle is neutrality. Now, as a therapist, I have to maintain a neutral stance. Now, individuals or subgroups, they might, at the end of the day, when you interview a therapist, or say interview the family members and ask, who do you think the therapist likes the most? Or who do you think the therapist is supporting? The family should have a confused look on their faces, which indicates that I have, as a therapist, maintained a neutral stance. When I'm working within the session, I know I'm going to talk with someone, talk for someone, talk to someone. I'm going to do all of that. But the balance that I'm having between doing all of that is called as neutrality. So when I talk to a family, they should tell, I don't know whose side you're on, but I think you have heard all of us out. Then I know as a therapist, I am neutral. The therapist is also cautious not to align with any one of the members, individual members, or subgroups. Now, it can be either explicitly done, as in There's some places where therapist feels that the child is being hurt and therefore I'm going to take the side of the child. It can be explicitly done, or it can be inside the head of the therapist. Implicitly inside my head, I am feeling sorry for one person within the family, because as a therapist, as a third person, I am viewing the family from an eagle's eye view. So I know what is happening and I understand. I probably feel like, or say for example, I have a bias. I see a woman who is being oppressed. Now, I give in to that. And I give in to that in my head. I start aligning with the mother or the wife or the daughter. Because in my head, I know something is not right. And I know that kind of support is going to help that person. But as a family therapist, I'm making a huge mistake there, because when I do that, I am not allowing the system to improve. I am rather being a barrier or as a stumbling block for the system to improve. Now, when I do that, what will happen? Invariably, when I'm talking or when I'm giving my hypothesis or I'm giving my feedback to the family, one way or the other, family is going to understand that I'm siding with one person. I don't have to tell them in words, but they will non-verbally, they will understand that I am taking one person's side. So there is going to be a lot of resistance, thereby not allowing the system to improve. And that is something that I have to be very, very careful about as a family therapist. All right. So I hope all these three principles are clear. Okay. Yes, triadic modality, I'll come to it a little later. All right. So can we move on to the next part of family therapy? Yes. All right. Thank you so much. And I know I'm just going with one person's response. Please don't feel biased. If there's any questions at the end, we do have a discussion interaction time. So you can have your questions and we will definitely work on that. Okay. Okay. Next, we are going to look at some working concepts that we have to understand in terms of working with families. What are the concepts? Now, the first thing is interpersonal context. All right. Now, we are looking at individuals in a context. We are not looking at them as a separate entity. This is something that I already explained before, right? So, resolution of a problem is more effective from within a context. So, if I have a problem in, say, for example, an adolescent feels that the parents are not understanding him or her, has to be spoken to in that context of parenting. I can't talk to the adolescent as an individual and say, you know what, elders are like that, it's okay, you, or or even for that matter, do an individual therapy, which is going to empower the adolescent as an individual, which is good. But will that resolve the problem? To an extent, it might, but not completely. But when I do both together, when I have an individual session with the adolescent, but not me, when I am doing a family therapy session, I cannot be the individual therapist, then my neutrality will be gone. I might maintain neutrality in the session, but with the system, they will not view me as a neutral person. So I cannot do that. That's just information that you all have to keep in mind. I'm just going to it pretty fast, so just ignore. Take note of that. Now, I have to talk to the adolescent as an individual and also in the context of parenting. So, I need the parents. And when I try to explain things to the adolescent in that context, it becomes clear for the adolescent as well as for the parents. Again, we are looking at a causality, circular causality. All right. So, any individual, we are going to work with them in the context. We will not work with them as an individual. The next concept you have to understand is complementarity. Now we spoke relationship is reciprocal. All right. Now that reciprocity is what defines the relationship, whether the relationship is good or bad, or it's neutral, or it's a very stable, it's equivalent, whatever it is, that reciprocity is what will define the relationship. So I am complementing my partner. My partner is complementing me. All right. So this And when we're talking about complementarity, the individuals within the system, they influence each other, but not control. All right, you can't control, you can't hold a person down and say, you know what, you have to do only what I say. That is not complementarity. When I'm saying complement, it basically means that I like the way my father is doing things, and I know that whatever he has done has helped in the longer run, and therefore I take up my characteristics after my father. I have seen that he is very good at work and he is a workaholic, and I've seen that has probably helped him in the longer run. So I'm influenced by the behavior of another person within the system. And therefore, in return, I also end up doing similar things. When I take up work, I start being a workaholic, I'm doing things. This Now this is complement in the literal sense. But when it comes to circularity, it's a little difficult to understand. So I'm just giving a linear example here. All right. Or say, for example, if you're talking in terms of couple. Now, how I compliment my husband and how my husband compliments me. There's a difference in how we do it. And that reciprocity. For example, I am telling my husband, like, say, it's been a long time since I've gone and met my friends in the long town. Is it okay if I go? Will you be able to help out with the kids? My husband says, yes, go. He also has work. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have work. He also has work. But we are complementing each other in that we understand that we both need a break. So when I go out, he's there. When he's there, when he goes out, I am there. So we are not controlling each other. We are trying to complement each other's relationship. So it basically indicates that our understanding of each other, our accommodation of each other is at a better place. All right. So that is the complementarity that we are talking about. Now, when it comes to triangulation, like we spoke about the triadic modality, what it means to be in a triangulation. Now, when a third party gets drawn into a conflicted situation, means parents are fighting, father and mother have severe conflicts, and they use the child as a scapegoat. All right. So, father is here, mother is here, and you have the child right in the middle. So, you have a triangle. All right. So, if the father wants to tell something to the mother, it goes through the child. If the mother wants to tell something to the father, it again goes through the child. Mother wants to scold father, mother scolds the child. Father wants to berate the mother, he does it with the child. That is triangulation, where we get another person sucked up into the conflictual situation, and it just makes things worse. Sometimes it might help, but most often it does not, because the person whom we are involving is an individual with their own understanding, their own personality, their own baggage. They come with it. It can be a child, it can be an adolescent, it can be a friend, it can be anybody. But they also have their own things that they have to look at, which will contribute to the conflict that is already there. All right. Now, what happens when they go into a triangulation like that? It tends to stabilize relationships. For example, father and mother might not divorce, even though they have severe conflict. They might not divorce, but the conflict is frozen. They are unable to resolve the conflict, so they tend to go in a circle, round and round and round. Understand? This is triangulation. When someone else gets pulled into the conflict, whether by choice or they don't have a choice, it's difficult. Now, the next concept we have to understand is we are looking at process rather than content. Is content not important? Yes, it is important. But we have to look at content through the process. All right. So, importance here is given to how people talk rather than what people talk. Eventually we will come to the content. We have to change the content, we have to make the changes in the problem, which is agreed. But the process that they go through, that, like we spoke in circularity, when in the process of trying to resolve a problem or to trying to mitigate a problem between the system, they end up hurting each other more and more by blaming and counter blaming. So they are ending up in a cycle which is hurting them in the process. That process is what we are talking about. There is a content to it, but there is also the process to it. So we have to understand the process and the content through the process. All right. So family is taught the process of resolution of conflicts. Now, the same way I end up in a conflict, I also have to learn to get out of the conflict. That is also a process. That change also will take time. So we have to teach the family how to get through that process. The next concept we have to understand is family life cycle stages. I have told you a few things about it. So we go through different family stages. Each family goes through a progressive stage. Now, in this, from moving from one stage to another, families have to make changes. They have to reorganize themselves. Now, a family with a newborn baby cannot stay the same way when the child is an adolescent. They have to change. The parents have to change. The children have to adapt, accommodate the changes that is happening from one cycle to the other. Now, there are growth phases when changes are more. For example, when the child is moving from a toddler to a school going child, there is a change that happens. Then, from school going child to adolescent, there is significant change that happens. In between these periods of growth, there is also periods of stability. All right. Now, children don't just go from one year to the other, right? Say, for example, school going is most often from 6 to 10 or 11. So there is a period of stability there wherein they are able to consolidate the changes that they have made during the growth phase. So whatever accommodation they have learned during the growth phase, they try to make it more adaptive and make it as their own characteristic or the personality trait like that. And family life cycle stages, it also helps in understanding the fact that families most often have problems during periods of transition. Now, when I'm moving from one phase to the other, I am unable to make that change. I am finding it difficult to move from one stage to the other without some difficulties. I can't understand how to make the change. Then there is a problem. So, family life cycle stage one, it gives us a setting of where the family stands at that point of time, number one. And number two, it gives us an understanding of where the problem could probably have started from and the circularity could have started from. Right? Okay. The next concept is resistance. Now, families, when you're trying to break the homeostasis, it can be a conflicted situation. They will be in a conflict, which is fine. But during that conflict time, there is a equilibrium that is maintained because of the problem. Like I said, parents are fighting and they are using the child as a scapegoat. So there is a homeostasis that is maintained because of that behavior. Now, when you're trying to break that resistance, homeostasis, there is resistance because I have to change and I'm not okay with the change. Now, when they are going through that resistance phase, it's an indicator for us as a therapist to find why the family is being resistant. It can be because of the fact that they are afraid, they are anxious that their secrets will be out, or it can be the very fact that change in itself is uncomfortable for me. I don't want to change. I'm comfortable in the position that I'm in. I don't want to change. Say, for example, the child might be using both the parents to get what he or she wants in that situation. Child can say, okay, father and mother are fighting. I can go talk to my father bad about my mom and get what I want. I can do the same thing with my mom. So there is something that the member is gaining because of which there will be resistance in terms of changing. So as a therapist, we have to be aware of why the resistance is happening and be able to understand the causality of that. Then we have family narratives. Now, every family has a story. Every family has a story, like how they go about with the daily living. Every day, how do they live? What is the process? Sunday, what happens? Saturday, what happens? There is a story that happens. So the narratives and their interactions are circular. Now, one I can understand that the way my father comes in, I can know whether my father's in a good mood or a bad mood, and that will instigate me to behave in a particular way, whether I should be cool or whether I can tell anything, or should I not, should I just leave the person alone. So the narrative, the story gives me ideas about how the interaction pattern happens between members of the system. Now, these narratives come out of experience. It cannot happen overnight. Over a period of time, they are living together, they see each other, they know each other, and it comes out of experience. Now, this experience, it creates expectations within the members, and it influences their future behavior. Now, once I drop something and I break, I get a spanking. So next time I know I should not drop it, and it comes out of my experience of doing it. So a simple example like this, there are narratives for the families. Okay, so this is about basic work concepts that we have to keep in mind when we're working with families. Some of them, I'm going to rush through the techniques, just some of them. Let's look at it. One is spontaneity. Now, the basic meaning of that is in its own motion. So, as a therapist, I am not joining with any of the family. I am in the context, but I am trying to see how I can make the context more relevant. I am moving in and out of the system. I'm going with the flow of the family and trying to make the change in the family. That is basically spontaneity. Okay. Now, therapist, when I have to, uh, if I have to use this technique, then I should know the family as a complete system. I should know the in and out of the family, the process of transformation, and the role that I have to play in making that change. This is very important. Then we have another technique called as joining, where see, the very fact that the family is there in front of you and allowing you to be a part of the family indicates that they need help. So they will allow you to an extent to join with the family. Now, this joining is very important for the therapist, but we have to be very careful when we are joining. It can be at different levels. I can join at the initial phase and I can withdraw myself as a therapist. I can join in the middle phase after giving my hypothesis and feedback and withdraw myself. So, as and when the therapist feels there is a need for the therapist. Now, this is across situations. It can also be with persons, with individuals. I feel that me aligning with the mother will increase her strength a little bit in the family. So, I align with the mother or join with the mother for a very short phase and I pull back. Once I know the mother's position is strengthened, I pull back. So that is also a possibility. But there is a back, the problem, the offside of this technique is sometimes it can come out as a very the therapist can come out as a very biased person. So unless and until we are very experienced and we know what we are doing, it's better not to go in for joining technique, because it's difficult, it's very easy for the therapist to get pulled into the family conflict, and we can easily start taking sides. Reframing. Now, when the family is coming to us, they have a frame of mind. They say this person is the problem. That is their framework of reference. Now, when they come into the therapy, now the therapist has a frame of reference. Okay. Now, what is that frame of reference? That is my goal for the family to move away from the conflict or resolve the conflict. So now both these frames will be in a clash at some point of time. And so we have to be able to reframe the problem into a resolution of a problem. And that is reframing. And sometimes reframing can also be where a symptom is reframed to the family as something that is positive. The same problem that they are putting in front of us can be got back to the family as something that will help in resolving the problem. All right. So reframing can be done in terms of both. Now we also have enactment, where normally what we do is we ask the families to talk to each other in the session. So when we see a live display of what will probably be happening in the family, that is one reason of enactment. Now, at the next level, once I know what the problem is, once I'm able to hypothesize the problem, I reintroduce these same patterns with the new meaning to it. And I try to see if the family can adapt new systems or new patterns that will resolve their difficulties. All right. Okay, the last two techniques is process questioning is one where the questions are about what's happening inside individuals and between them. Not about, like I said, it's about the process. Now, why is this important? When we're talking about the process, it will slow down the individuals because they are anxious. Something is not okay. They are worried about it. They're anxious about it. So it will slow down the individuals. It will reduce reactive reactions. Now, I react when someone is talking in the session, I can react very badly to it because I can say that, I am also hurt on the process. How is it that only you're telling you're hurt? I am also hurt. So it will reduce this process questions will reduce the reactive reactions, and it will start them to start thinking about the process or about the causality of the problem. That is process questions. And then there's boundary making. Now, boundaries are basically, like we spoke about, open, closed, semi-permeable boundaries. Now, when we are talking about in terms of intervention or using the technique in the sessions, we are talking about either increasing the proximity or closeness of the systems and subsystems, or we are increasing the distance. I can, depending upon the problem, depending upon the hypothesis and what the problem is, I will either increase the distance or decrease the distance between systems and subsystems. Now, here, how do I do it? I encourage the members to talk for themselves. And when someone is trying to interrupt, as a therapist, I can always tell them that, you know what, let's listen to them, we will come back to you. I can always do that. And subsystems are urged to complete their dialogue without intrusion. For example, if the child is trying to is has understood that sitting in the session parents are going to resolve their conflict, then I cannot get what I want. When the parents are trying to talk in the session, the child can keep interrupting or tell that, I know I'm hungry, I want to go here, I want to go out. They can disrupt the session to a greater extent. As a therapist, we'll have to encourage the parents to tell the child to calm down or to distract the child, to settle him down and come back and finish their conversation, not leave it halfway through. That way, I'm building the boundary there between the marital subsystem and the sibling subsystem. All right. So these are different techniques. There are various schools of family therapy: structural, Milan, strategic, narrative, transition. There are more. There are more theories. So I'm going to stop the session right now here. We have about another 15-20 minutes with us. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and send it on chat. Now, I also know there are some of you who are professionals who must have already gone through all these things. So if you think that this is at a very basic level and you want a little more, then you can also put it on the chat. We'll see what we can do about it in the next session. Elaborate on the technique of process questioning. Okay. Uh, right. Now, when I talk about process questioning, instead of asking, how are you feeling? I would rather say, when your husband is telling this, what happens to you? What is happening inside you? All right. Now, I can ask a third member in the family, when I am talking, what do you think is happening when your father and your sister talk like that? What do you think about it? Or what do you think is happening between your father and mother? All right. So I'm going in a circular way. I'm trying to get more information and I'm trying to understand the process at the same time. Okay, we will have activities. Next session will be on assessment. The final session will be on understanding dynamics. So it is going to be case histories, and we are going to give you practical examples and ask you to work it out within groups, and we will discuss that. So yes, we will have practical session activities as well. Can you explain the principles again? Okay, that is going to be very difficult. I'll just give you a brief about it. One is hypothesizing, where I'm assuming or I'm trying to have a assumption of what is probably wrong within the system. And when the family comes to me for session, I'm going to try and see if my hypothesis is right or wrong, whether it is proved or disproved. And then if it is right, I'm going to base my session related to the hypothesis and nudge the family towards a structured conversation in that sense. And then next is circularity. We are looking at uh, how things can go in a circular fashion. They are stuck up in a position, doesn't matter who started it, but it's a blaming and counter blaming over a period of time. It's become a pattern for the family. Now, neutrality, as a therapist, I need to have a neutral stance. I cannot be biased in my session. I cannot align with one member and leave the other member out. All right. So, in brief, I have given, but if you want more clarity, then maybe we will see how best we can help you out otherwise. What are certain things we should be careful while drawing a hypothesis? We should, as a therapist, what I feel is sometimes we tend to get stuck to a hypothesis. We feel that, I'm the therapist, I know what is happening to you, and we are not ready to give it up. But even if we know it is not right, if it's not helping the family. So I would say that is one thing we have to be careful about. And while drawing a hypothesis, always keep in mind the circularity of the problem. Like we said, family in a context, system as a whole. We cannot have individual hypothesis, it has to be a whole. These are two main things that we have to be very careful about while hypothesizing. um, okay, when we are hypothesizing, we are not being judgmental, we are only assuming. Now when we are judgmental, we stick to the thought, we are telling someone is bad. Now in a family setting, when we are hypothesizing, like I said, they are a system, they are a whole unit. So when I'm hypothesizing, I am trying to see where the problem is happening, or why the problem is happening, and how is it being maintained. Because it's not like families come to you the very first time they get a problem. They might have been in that circularity for quite a number of years. So we are not being judgmental, but we are, by doing that, we are in fact teaching the family to say, learn to be organized. When we are not organized, obviously we cannot show the family how to be organized. So by hypothesizing, we are not judging, we are rather trying to see what is the best strategy that will help the family to get out of the circularity much faster. um, okay, scales to be used in family counseling. Okay, we will think about it. um, get introduced the diagram of family. Okay, if you're asking about, are you asking about genogram? Is that what you're looking at? If it is genogram, then yes, in the next session we will be talking about genogram when it comes to assessments. The third person there is referring to the therapist or someone apart from the therapist. No, we are talking about someone from within the system. In triangulation, okay, the question is this: in triangulation, the third person there is referring to the therapist or someone apart from the therapist. Now, when it's triangulation, we are talking about a third person from within the system or the supra system. The therapist cannot be part of the system. Like I said, even when we are joining or we are reframing, we are trying to unbalance, we will be moving in and out of the system, but we will also maintain a neutral stance. So if you are talking like that, then we cannot be a part of that system. All right. So when it's triangulation, you are talking about a third party either from within the system or from the supra system. Um, can the principles of pattern, when address the family, how effective be avoided by the child in the future? Um, okay, a little tough. Can the principles of pattern, when addressed in the family, how effective it would be avoided by the child in the future? Now, see, when they are sitting in the session, uh, it's not just about resolving problem, we are also teaching them how to get out of it in the same process. Now here is where we have to understand about the process. Now, once the children understand that this is not helping and they see the benefits of the corrected system, then to a larger extent they are also happy. Initially they might be very resistant, because always remember, when it is conflict in the parental system, it's the children who get to be benefited at the end of the day. They very nicely play up in that situations. But there is also an other side to it, where they are anxious. They are worried, what if my parents get a divorce? Is it because of me? There are also other concerns that they bring into the whole equation. So if the system is corrected, for all you know, it is the child who is the one who is the most happiest, because he or she, as long as they are a they can be a child or an adolescent, they want to know that their parents relationship is stable. And when they know it is stable, and they know that no matter what happens, the parents are going to be there for them, that safety net, that security, it is beneficial for the children, and they understand that. So that is a huge thing that children learn at the end of the session. That, and that is what they want. They might resist it consciously, but subconsciously what they want is for the system to be stable. With regards to hypothesizing, is it correct to even do that? Because we were told that we should never make assumptions when we practice counseling. Okay. All right. Now, uh, see, we are not assuming anything that is wrong. And also keep in mind that after hypothesizing, I'm not sticking to my assumption. I talk to the family, and if I realize my hypothesis is wrong, then I correct myself. I reframe. I go, I delete that and I go and do another hypothesis. Now, like we said, there is a benefit in doing hypothesis. All right. I understand there are counseling principles that we follow, that you're not allowed to assume. Now, by assuming, that does not mean that as soon as the family comes, I am going to ask them questions based on my hypothesis. No. Like I said, we need to allow them process to talk about whatever they are going through. We need to give them that time to ventilate, to bring out whatever is happening in the system. All right. After that, based on that information, we are not going to tell the family that we have already hypothesized. We are not going to tell the family. We are going to ask questions to the family. We are going to ask circular questions. We are going to ask process questions to the family and get information. Now, how is hypothesis helping me in that? It is helping me get a structured interview. I can get unwanted, unnecessary details in the process of collecting details, right? Now, if my hypothesis is right, it's going to help me have a proper framework. And that framework is only going to help the family at the end of the day. When I am right, I know I am in the right track, I get the right intervention for the family, which is going to get them out of the problem, which is going to help them resolve the problem. So, hypothesis, if I'm sticking on to my assumption and telling I am only right, then it becomes a problem. But if I'm using my hypothesis to understand the family and help the family to resolve issues faster, then I guess it's a good principle to keep in mind. We work with recreated families, as many of our clients have a lot of disruption of family due to loss of parent, siblings due to illnesses, or due to vulnerable populations like alternate sexualities, and they create their own safety spaces families. How would you suggest we work out family therapy in such cases? Okay. um, See, like I said, when we're talking about family life cycle stages, it's a framework, a reference for us to understand where families are standing. All right. But otherwise, we don't change the principle, we don't change the concepts, even when we are working with recreated families. It is going to be the same concept, it is going to be the same principle. The same importance we give to a family, we give to them also. There is no big difference. What a parent, like for example, if you're talking about say alternate sexualities, and you find that both mothers are there, but if you talk to them, one female member will be having the male role, and the other female member will be having the mother role, father and mother. So they will have their roles defined. It is just about the gender, just about the appearance, but the roles do not change. When it comes to a family, the roles are the same. So the same principle we follow in any other families, we follow here. There will be no change in that. But if you're asking for specific therapy modalities, yes, there are different modalities that work with different families, depending upon the circumstance, depending upon the situation that the family is coming to us in. So that probably we'll have to look at in a little more detail once we learn the basics. But it's a good question. Do bring it up a little later or just mail it to me as well, and we will see how to get into details of that. Enactment, the therapist is literally allowing the family to have an episode in front of them to analyze the situation. Okay. We are not allowing, it's like, for example, if they are going to have name calling in the session, if they're going to get violent, we are not going to allow that. That is not what we want. We want to understand the pattern. We want to understand the reciprocity. Now, if mother says this, how does father react to it? When father and mother are fighting, how does the child react to it? I'm just seeing the pattern, but I'm, as a therapist, if I sit there, I'm not going to allow anything else beyond understanding the pattern. All right. So if you're talking about violent situations, no, it's a big no. We will not allow that in the session. And when we are stopping that, the way we do it, the family will learn the next time how to resolve a conflict. During a conflicted time, they are highly stressed out. They are at their last straw. They don't know what else to do, and they resort to name calling and they start yelling at each other. Then we interfere as a therapist and we calm them down, we help them relax, and then we put things into perspective for the family. All right. So that is again giving us an understanding of the pattern. At the same time, in the session, we are also teaching the family how to resolve conflictual situations or balance themselves during conflictual times. And they can always bring it back in the session and we can see where it all started from and the circularity of it. We can help them through the process. I think we missed an important concept called as problem bearer. Yeah, I haven't covered all concepts and all techniques. I have just given you few of the concepts and few of the techniques. Eventually, in the course of all 4 sessions, we will be able to cover more of them. I have given my mail ID. It's in there in the chat. All right. I will also put it on the WhatsApp group. So whatever questions you have, please do mail it to me and we will take it up from there. It was nice having all of you in the session. I hope this was beneficial. Let's see if we can have more in-depth understanding of different concepts in that time. We'll see how best we can help you on that. So I'll meet you next Friday. Have a nice weekend.